Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altu sahla wa anta taj'al hazna idha shi'ta sahla. First of all, my apologies, sincere apologies for turning up late. I was supposed to be earlier, but qaddar Allahu ma shafa'al. The second thing is that as we're speaking, we're hearing about things taking place, not just in Syria, not just in Palestine and Gaza, may Allah Azza wa Jal save and protect them, but also in Syria, things are happening. And it is relevant because the struggles of the Ummah continue always. Though they're focused in one place right now, it is incumbent upon us to be aware and cognitive about the struggles of the Ummah everywhere. And whatever we're able to assist, we should do, even if that is just spreading or learning about one word and spreading it. And with that, the reason why I say that, the Prophet ﷺ said in a famous hadith, "Man la yahtami umur al-muslimina falaysa minhum." Whoever does not concern himself with the affairs of the Muslims is not from amongst them. The story of Guantanamo perhaps is, well, let me just put it this way. I've spoken at many universities, many colleges and other events, and recently I spoke to young students across this country, from Edinburgh all the way down to Surrey and everything in between. And I asked this question: put your hands up if you've heard of the Holocaust. Everybody's hand goes up, absolutely everyone. Then I asked them, put your hands up if you've heard of Srebrenica. And I will say, mostly, we'll be lucky if we get out of 105 hands. And then I ask, how many of you have heard of Abu Ghraib? And almost no hands go up. Why is that important? The Holocaust, the genocide against the Jews, by Europeans. So European Jews are murdered and butchered by European fascists and Nazis. All of these are European ideologies. Nazism, European. Fascism, European. Anti-Semitism, European. Communism, European. Capitalism, European. So these are all European ideologies created during European wars, which they've called world wars. Imagine the smallest continent on earth has two wars in which the first 20 million people are killed, in the second 60 million people are killed. And they call them world wars, but had it not been for Europe, neither war would have happened. Had it not been for Europe, the massacre and the genocide of the Jews wouldn't have happened. And yet Muslims who are at best in both of these wars either sidelined or not even mentioned, they know all about the Holocaust. But they know nothing, especially our current generations now in the universities, they know nothing or very little about Europe's genocide, the biggest genocide that took place in Europe, once again, this time against the indigenous Muslim population in Europe. And it wasn't because they're brown-skinned or dark-skinned, because when it comes to the hatred against Muslims and Islamophobia, you could be as black as the sky at night or as white as paint. It doesn't make any difference. If you say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, you are a target. Evidence, the Muslims of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1995, after over 100,000 of them were killed, after 50,000 Muslim women were placed into rape camps and systematically raped by the armies of Ratko Mladic and Slobodan Milosevic, so that they could say that these Muslim women will give birth to the next generation of their own enemies. The twisted logic. After that, thousands of Muslims who were fleeing and were given so-called refuge by the Dutch United Nations forces told them, come here to the city of Srebrenica take refuge here, you'll be protected from the murderous Bosnian Serb army. And so they took refuge. And the Dutch United Nations left. And then Ratko Mladic comes with his forces. He captures every boy and man, ties them in a field with their hands behind their back, and shoots them in the back of the head. This is recorded history, and it happened in 1995. And it happened only to Muslims in Srebrenica. It happened because they were Muslims. White, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Slavic Muslims. So one of the important things for us to always remember, when it comes to Islam, whilst we've all faced different aspects of racism, the racist is colorblind when it comes to Islam. And if you think about, perhaps you may know of this, but before I go to that, bear in mind that people know about what happened 85 years ago. Our parents, grandparents, are not from Europe. Is it incumbent upon them to know about the Holocaust? Yet it is not incumbent upon them to know, or for us to know, what happened in our lifetime. How come some of the people who were born in 1995, who are now at university, don't know what happened in the year they were born? And that's because of a failure, a major failure, not just of the education system. I went to a Jewish school as a child. As a child, I studied with Jews in a primary school. They read from the Torah. They told the stories of Musa alayhi salam and the Exodus from Egypt and being chased by Pharaoh. We celebrated Pesach and Purim and Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and all of this. A deep, deep love and connection to their history. How is it that in our madaris and in our masajid and in our marakis, Srebrenica isn't taught that this is what happened in our lifetime? A genocide, recognized genocide by the International Criminal Court. The heads of the Bosnian Serbs were imprisoned as a result of war crimes. Yet we don't teach it. Barely anyone knows it. Why is it that nobody knows? When I ask, can you put your hands up if you've ever heard of Abu Ghraib? No, it's not a name of a Sahabi that you've never heard of. Abu Ghraib is the name of a notorious prison camp in Iraq that was operated by the Americans when they took over, where they stripped people naked. Men and women were systematically raped by the American soldiers. They were put naked, five on the floor, naked men. Then 4 on top of them, naked men. Then 3 on top of them, naked men. Then 2 on top of them, naked men. Then 1 on top of them, naked men, causing it a naked prisoner pyramid. Practicing Muslims just like you, thobes and beards, didn't make any difference, all shaved off, humiliated. Why do we not know about this? Why have we not taught people about this? Why are our youth not aware of it? Why are our masajid not teaching this? That is a part of our faith, happening in the great city of Baghdad, that produced such ulama and leaders, that was the seat of Islamic learning. How come we can't teach anybody about this? How come then we can't teach anybody about Guantanamo? We run and flee from the very concept because it may be connected to somebody accused of terrorism. But ironically, out of the 800 prisoners there, 800 prisoners from almost 50 different Islamic countries, you see, what they managed to do is unite us. In the hatred, they united us. And what they said is that your first condition for you to be a prisoner in Guantanamo is that you must be a Muslim, not that you're a terrorism suspect, because there are no members of the far right in Guantanamo. Anders Breivik, who shot 69 young people in Oslo and killed another 7 with a bombing when he went out and shot them one by one in the head. A complete act of far right terrorism. He never went to Guantanamo. Tamil Tigers, who carry out suicide bombings regularly, they never went to Guantanamo. Michigan militias and others who carried out attacks in Oklahoma and beyond and killed hundreds of people, white supremacist racists, they don't go to Guantanamo. So the primary condition isn't terrorism. The primary condition is being a Muslim. And there you will find Uyghurs from East Turkestan, so-called, as the Chinese will call them, from Xinjiang province. You'll find people from Mauritania. You'll find people from Kuwait, from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, from Bangladesh. You name the place, there's people there. But what unites them? Revert Muslims from Australia. You name them, they're in Guantanamo. And what brings them together is La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. That's why they're targeted. Remember I said to you that the far right, the Muslim hater, it's not just the far right, by the way. It's not just the far right who hate Muslims. You'll see it's also other ideologies. Even the far left. When it comes to Islam, you'll see. They show their colors very clearly. When Brenton Tarrant, who was another guy from the far right, Australian, walked into 2 mosques in 2018-19 with a series of rifles in his hand, into 2 mosques in a place called Christchurch in New Zealand. On a Jummah, imagine this, just imagine, just picture yourself, we're in a masjid right now. He comes in at the front door, he's totally armed, shotguns and assault rifles. He's wearing a camera because he's live streaming what he's about to do next. His weapons have emblazoned upon those weapons, do you know what? Names of engagements with the Muslim world. Vienna, the siege of Vienna, the Crusades, the Reconquista of Spain, all of these engagements. And then he has names of people from the far right also written in white marker on his gun. These are things he's celebrating. He walks in, he sees an old Afghani man, Pakistani or Afghani man, the uncle with his love, his natural love, seeing somebody come to the mosque who's not a Muslim. Hello, brother. Hello, brother. That's the first person he kills. Then he walks in. Just imagine somebody walks through that door. He takes aim. There's children in the masjid, there's women on the other side. The children run towards the parents. The parents try to shield the child, and he comes in, bang, 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 bang. That day he kills over 50 children, 50 men, women, and children. 50. He kills white Muslims, he kills brown Muslims, he kills black Muslims, he kills children, he kills women, he kills Sunnis, he kills Hanafis and Shafi'is and Malikis and Hanabila. He doesn't care about the difference. Allah Azza wa Jal says to us that we're one united ummah, though we're deeply, deeply divided. But this enemy of Islam has united us in his hatred. He sees us as one. And so when he kills, what is he listening to? It's fascinating. Remember, he's an English speaker. He has no connection to Bosnia and Herzegovina. He doesn't speak the language there, which is Serbo-Croat. But he's got on his head, as well as live streaming what he's killing. You know what he's listening to motivate himself? He's listening to Serbian nationalist songs that praise Radovan Karadzic, who is the head of the Bosnian Serbs, who was later convicted for war crimes and is in prison as we speak in this country as part of that imprisonment. He's listening to songs that praise this war criminal. And that's why it's important for us to understand that this unity of enmity towards Islam is something that we will see repeatedly. The targeting of Muslims, calling them extremists, calling them terrorists, calling them zealots, calling them fundamentalists in order to delegitimize anything that they are doing. That's why you'll find the communist government of China will imprison Muslims and force them to renounce their shahada, force them to drink alcohol, force the women to cohabit with non-Muslim, non-mahram men, force the children into re-education centers where the shahada and the pillars of Islam are replaced by the Communist Party manifesto. And all of that is done using the same terminology of the war on terror, is that these guys are extremists. Islam is a mental illness, and we need to instill into them Chinese values to make them into equal citizens. That's communist China doing that, whilst capitalist America invades Muslim country after Muslim country, torturing, imprisoning without charge or trial, creating a system where their own laws don't apply in the name of fighting extremists and terrorists. So capitalists and communists come together in the hatred for Islam. But that's just a bit of the backdrop. And I don't want you to focus on all how bad everybody is and so forth. We expect this. Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَلَا يَزَالُونَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ حَتَّى يُرُدُّوكُمْ عَنْ دِينِكُمْ إِنِ اسْتَطَاعُوا. That they'll continue to fight you until they force you to turn back from your faith. So let me just give you some example of people who've held on to their faith in ways you cannot imagine. There's a brother, his name is Zain al-Abidin Muhammad Hussein. His nickname or his kunya is Abu Zubaydah. What's beautiful about Abu Zubaydah is that he is a Palestinian. He's a Palestinian who grew up in Gaza. And as a young man, he, like many Palestinians in his area, grew up throwing stones at the occupation tanks that would come into his home. He became part of the Palestinian diaspora, as many do. They leave trying to find somewhere where they fit. They don't feel like human beings in their own land. They're not made to feel like human beings. They're made to feel like they're living in a prison. And it is indeed a prison. So he travels, and as part of his discovery or rediscovery of his identity, he hears that there is a movement in Afghanistan that wants to, led by a Palestinian scholar called Sheikh Abdullah Azzam, who wants to help to rid Afghanistan of the Soviets, but then to create an army that will one day liberate Palestine. That's what he wants to do. So he joins them. After many years go by, the war on terror begins, and the United States falsely say that he's a member of Al-Qaeda, or that he's involved in doing something against the United States. He's not. He does want to liberate his land. But that's quite different to being an enemy directly of the United States of America. And so in the whole madness around the war on terror, where people are being captured left, right, and center and being sold for bounties by Pakistan and a whole host of other countries, Abu Zubaydah is captured and believed to be a senior member of Al-Qaeda. But one of the best things for Abu Zubaydah was his own diaries. See, Abu Zubaydah used to write things down about his life, generally about his thoughts. And he had several diaries. And for years, the Americans didn't look at these diaries, though they had them in his custody. They had them in custody. And then they started to read his diaries. And they came to the conclusion, begrudgingly, because they put in the media that this is a senior Al-Qaeda member. They begrudgingly, but they had to accept that he wasn't. And that he wasn't a threat to the United States of America, but that he was trying to find a way to liberate his land. So they take Abu Zubaydah to a series of secret detention sites, and they put him, one of the things they do to Abu Zubaydah is that they put him alive into a coffin, naked. They strip his clothes off, and they leave him. Periodically they put him in this coffin, but sometimes they leave him in there for days on end, totally naked. They've drilled holes into that coffin. When I say coffin, I mean just a box, a wooden box. They drill holes into that box so that he can breathe, but periodically they pour water in there too. So he could drink perhaps, but then it starts to fill up. And they subject Abu Zubaydah to a technique that was used against Muslims and Jews during the Spanish Inquisition called waterboarding. In Spanish it's called tortura del agua, which means the water torture, where they tie a man's hands and legs and head to a bunk. They put a cloth into his mouth, and then they pour water into the nose repeatedly until the person feels like they're drowning, even though they're not underwater. This technique was used by the Spanish against Muslims, especially against women, because they said this was a softer technique rather than pulling out somebody's fingernails or torturing him in the terrible ways that they'd used. And so this technique was used repeatedly by abusers over time, including the Nazis, including the French in Algeria, including many others, and the Americans against certain prisoners. Alhamdulillah, I wasn't subjected to this, but I know brothers who were. And amongst them is Abu Zubaydah. He was waterboarded over 83 times. But Abu Zubaydah is made of some strong constitution. And when he's in the coffin, he asks his torturers, the CIA, I want to pray. They said, sure, pray in your coffin. Pray where you are. But he says, I need to wash. So imagine, you're in this box. We're in a masjid here, right? You're in this box. You're naked. You've soiled yourself. You don't know where the Qibla is. You can't stand. You can't even sit. You can't do takbirat al-ihram. You can't do ruku'. You can't do sajda. You can't do any of the most basic things that's required in salah. Yet Abu Zubaydah performs his salah in this way, several days on end, like this. And if you want to understand the nature of incarceration and the situation it puts one in, just remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said to us, of us, we are the ummah, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ, those who remember Allah standing, sitting, or lying down. It gives you the sense that this ummah has been blessed by the examples of people of the past. We hear the stories of so many Sahaba being tortured in ways that you can't imagine. You hear the story of Bilal ibn Rabah radiallahu anhu and Ammar bin Yasir being tortured beyond words. You see Ammar being buried with his mother up to the neck, deep in the heat, humiliated, his mother killed in front of him, forced to say the word of kufr on his tongue even though his heart's filled with iman. You see Bilal radiallahu anhu, that he's tortured with heat, in the heat of the day, whipped, and then heavy stones that takes 3 or 4 people to carry to put them on his chest, and he responds by saying, Ahadun ahad, Allahu ahad, that no matter what they try to do, and Allah Azza wa Jal honors Bilal above anyone else, that he goes, he is the one that climbs the Kaaba. This black slave is honored, so-called black slave, but he's a slave of Allah more than he's a slave of any man. And he climbs and he calls the adhan and he calls the people to prayer. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honors those who in this society today are discriminated against. Abdullah ibn Maktoum, who is a blind man, he is the other mu'adhin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When he goes, he leaves him in charge sometimes. He's a blind man who calls the adhan. Allah Azza wa Jal honors him. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam honors these men. You take the story of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. We know him as one of the great commentators of the Quran. But he's beaten and tortured and spat upon and called all sorts of names. He's called Ya Ruwayya al-Ghanam, you little shepherd boy. They make fun of his legs because they're thin. And what happens? It becomes Abdullah ibn Mas'ud at the Battle of Badr is the one that delivers the final blow on Fir'aun of this ummah, on Abu Jahl. He's the one. So his status is raised beyond anything you one could have imagined. And in the same way, there are so many examples of people who Allah Azza wa Jal has honored because of what they've gone through. So let me give you another little example. In the Bagram detention facility, several things. I was held there for about a year or so. I used to hear the sounds of a woman screaming in this place. I saw 2 brothers beaten to death with their hands, one of them with their hands tied above the cage, above his head to the top of the cage, being punched repeatedly. Punched and kicked as an Afghani taxi driver, totally innocent. Yet they beat him to death. And the reason why they beat him to death, listen to this, isn't because he did something, isn't because he was guilty of something, isn't because he's a member of Al-Qaeda, he was not even Taliban. It's because when they kicked him, they found it amusing that he says, Allah, Allah. And the soldiers on duty that night called one another. And I know this partly because I witnessed it, but the other part is because it's all in the transcripts of the court case against the soldiers. And they found it amusing that when we kick this taxi driver, he says, Allah, Allah. So the soldiers on guard start to call their buddies. Hey, kick this guy. See what he says. And for sure, it's like pressing a button. They kick him, he says, Allah, Allah. They kick him on his thigh. They kick him on his thigh about 200 times that night, to the point at which the blood stops to flow in his leg. And the autopsy report said had he survived, his leg would have required amputation. But he dies. That's Dilawar, the taxi driver. So Bagram is a place that I witnessed a great deal of horror. But alhamdulillah, it was also a place that I wouldn't have traded that experience for anything. But Allah Azza wa Jal's gift to me, it was the place that I memorized the largest surah in the Quran. Even though they used to abuse us for reciting the Quran. Even though they would take the Quran, or before they hand the Quran to you, a mushaf to you, sometimes I saw this with my eyes, they'll throw it in the air and drop kick it to you. That's the merciful version. We saw them rip the Quran into pieces, throw it into buckets and urinate upon it. We saw them, you'd come back from interrogations in Guantanamo and find spit marks in your mushaf, in your Quran, boot marks, or swears, F Islam, F the Quran. But alhamdulillah, all of this taught us. It taught us a great, great deal. And one of the things we learnt is that if you want to torture me or break me by desecrating the Quran, I will give back the Quran to you, you enemy of Allah. Take it back. But my brother who's a hafiz over there, on the other cell, he's going to teach me the original way, the old way, the way that the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba. They didn't have a mushaf. None of them did. There was no mushaf at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There was no mushaf at the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. The only reason why the Quran is put into a book in the first place is why? Because the memorizers of the Quran from Ahl al-Sufa all went off in its defense. Musaylim al-Kadhab, who claimed to be a prophet after the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, I also have revelation. So all those who'd memorized the Quran, they didn't just put it up or just memorize it parrot fashion or recite it or put it up onto a shelf. They were they understood this is a book of life, a manual for life. And they went to its defense, and one by one they all got shaheed. Until Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu said to Abu Bakr, if we do not put these parchment, this Quran, this reading into one book, I fear that the Quran will be lost. And that is why the book was put together in the first place. If we were to look at our very history of the things that we take for granted every day, we would never be able to be thankful enough. When every time you look at the Quran, you think this is together here because of the shuhada. And so Islam for us was crucial as a thing to protect ourselves. By Allah's grace, after spending 1 year in Bagram, I was sent to Guantanamo. And I never saw that place ever again. until last year. I went back to Bagram last year. Imagine that. And I didn't go there with American soldiers or interrogators or torturers or abusers. Now I went there with brothers who were imprisoned with me. But this time these brothers were not captives, they were conquerors. They were not victims, they were victors. Going back to this place in Bagram, one of the brothers, he walks in with me. He said, "Do you remember we used to be here? They used to torture us if we even recited the Quran with a loud voice. They wouldn't allow us to pray in Jama'ah. Ramadan came and went, we didn't even know. We guessed the times for iftar and guessed the times for suhoor. If we made du'as and our voices were loud, they'd take us to the front of the cell just like they did to Dilawar, and they would tie us up and leave us there suspended with a hood over our heads for hours on end." This is what Bagram was. Now walking into this place, no American flags, only the flag of La ilaha illallah. And the verse immediately comes to mind. قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ تُؤْتِي الْمُلْكَ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتَنْزَعُ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُعِزُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُذِلُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ بِيَدِكَ الْخَيْرُ إِنَّكَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Say, "O Allah, King of kings, ruler of the rulers, you give power and dominion to whoever you wish, and you remove it from whoever you wish, and you honor whoever you wish, and you debase and disgrace whoever you wish." The United States now is just a memory of evil in Afghanistan, just the way the Soviet Union was. And the irony is that the Bagram detention facility that I was held in was actually built by the Soviet Union and used by the Americans as a torture camp. And even more, the brothers who took me and facilitate my visit to Afghanistan are now, who were once imprisoned in Guantanamo 14 years, 15 years, 16 years, no charge, no trial, and all the abuse I explained to you. Imagine they take you into custody, shave off your beard, shave off your hair, strip you naked, humiliate you. These brothers I'm talking about. They have all returned and are senior ministers in their government. They control armies of thousands. They control the borders, they control the defense, they control intelligence, they control the interior. They are the decision makers. It is with them that the United States negotiated the humiliating withdrawal and retreat of the soldiers from Afghanistan. And it is them that have given us full access to the investigations of a case that I think probably all of you have heard of, and that is, I would say, the worst in the whole of the war on terror, and that is the case of Aafia Siddiqui. And Aafia Siddiqui's case is the worst for several different reasons, but I'll mention to you just two or three. One is that she's a woman. But she's not just a woman, she's a mother. And before she was taken into custody, or when she was taken into custody, one of her children is believed to have died as a result of the process, 6-month-old Suleiman, and two of the others, Maryam and Ahmed, were taken into custody. Maryam into the custodianship of a white Christian evangelist American family who were living in Kabul as part of the CIA connections. And Ahmed, who was taken into custody as a 6-year-old into a juvenile prison. You don't have prisons for children that young anywhere in the world. Yet they did that. And Ahmed and Maryam are both US citizens. They were both born there. Alhamdulillah, eventually they got freed after a long process. And they're both in Pakistan. one is studying medicine and one has become a doctor. But Suleiman never made it home. Young Suleiman, we believe, died on the tarmac, thrown to the ground or fallen. And the other reason why Aafia's case is so terrible is because she was, as a daughter of Pakistan, was handed over by Pakistan. I was handed over by Pakistan. And Pakistan handed over many people without any legal process, literally kidnapping from their homes. They took me in front of my wife and kids. No legal process, no charge, no trial, just a bit of money. But the difference with Aafia is that she's a woman, as I said. And then she's taken into custody and terribly violated. And inshallah, maybe in Q&A we can go over some of the stuff of Aafia's case. The final process in Aafia's case is that she's accused of attempting to shoot an American soldier, which is something entirely nonsensical. It makes absolutely no sense. And part of the reason I've returned to Afghanistan is to investigate in detail with lawyers and take crucial eyewitness evidence as to what actually happened. And what we've discovered is so damning of the United States government that it is in their interests to release her. Because if they don't, the evidence we will bring forth will prove so much the lies, the cover-ups, the untruths told by the US in order to convict her. And we have Afghan policemen who served with the Americans. We have Afghan politicians who served with the Americans giving us testimony. And finally, Aafia Siddiqui is in a prison in FMC Carswell, which has been described now as we speak. It is a woman's prison in Texas that has been described by several activists and lawyers who've worked on these cases as a rape camp in America. Meaning, because there's only female prisons there, and mostly they have some kind of mental health matters, they require treatment, not abuse. But as you know, we've had those cases here in the UK where people who are supposed to be looked after by the state or by privatized individuals connected to mental health, if there's no oversight, then it's very easy to abuse people who are vulnerable. And that's what happened to Aafia and many other women in that prison. Out of the last 7 years, 13 staff members of FMC Carswell have been convicted of rape, including Aafia making allegations that it's happened to her. So the level of torture, abuse, and violence that it's taken place against Aafia is really hard to quantify, but we've done so. And we are seeking, before President Biden leaves, for a petition for Aafia to be granted a pardon before he leaves office. And the reason why I'm asking for a pardon and not for a retrial is because a retrial will require all the evidence we've got, which has taken over a year to compile, a year and a half. It will require all of that to go through a long-winded legal process. As you know, legal processes can last up for years and years to try to get it to the Supreme Court, to try to get somebody to even look at it. And so we believe that the best way is to get her out from where she is and somehow back, perhaps to a third country where she can rehabilitate, and then perhaps to Pakistan. So that is what we're trying to do, and we're asking everybody that we can to sign a petition. We've got close to 500,000 on that petition. We want to get 1 million. And to write a letter. The letter, we have already made the template for the letter. Inshallah, we can pass to you through your WhatsApp groups that you can send that. There is no risk. You're not going to be targeted. No one's going to do anything to you. This is just writing a letter to Biden calling for Aafia to be freed and pardoned. There's a lot more to say about what I've been doing in terms of the work of Cage and so forth, and our brother Tamim has also explained to you some of the background of the work of Cage. It is a unique organization. You will not find one like it. I know people will say, when you say organizations, we should help organizations like Cage. Just name me an organization like Cage. Just name me one. There isn't any. There are none. Not staffed by former prisoners, not staffed by survivors, not staffed by people who've taken on the state and by Allah's grace are still standing. There aren't any organizations like Cage. So if you want to support Cage, then support Cage. Alhamdulillah, this is not to say other organizations who are doing different aspects of work in relation to Islamophobia and defending our rights shouldn't be supported. They should. They all deserve our support. The reason why Cage is dealing with so many cases now of Palestine activism, hundreds of brothers and sisters, Muslims and non-Muslims, being arrested and some are even in prison as we speak, for trying to sabotage the weapon systems that go directly from the UK in order to bomb and to widow and to orphan and to kill the children in Gaza. They go from the UK. So these activists have broken into these places and taken it upon themselves to sabotage this. As a result, they've been arrested. And their argument in court won't be, I didn't do it, Your Honor, I didn't do it. The argument will be, I did do it. And I did it because you did nothing while a genocide was taking place in our lifetime. And that genocide has been recognized by the International Court of Justice. It has been recognized in the arrest warrant that has been issued for Benjamin Netanyahu for his role in war crimes and the targeting of civilians and the siege and the besiegement of starving civilians. It has all been recognized. If this was some poor African leader in the middle of some poor African nation, you would have invaded by now and took him by force and took him to The Hague. And you've taught us since we were children, from now till adulthood, one law for all. Everybody is equal under the law. So apply the law. You've never applied it on us equally. You've held our relatives and friends and co-religionists in detention camps around the world for years without end, without charge or trial, yet you claim to be nations of the rule of law. But still, we hold you to this standard. And so Cage has developed this expertise over the years to defend people. MI5 comes knocking on your door, we tell you how to deal with them. They are human beings. They are not malaika. They are not Sahaba. They are not Rusul al-Anbiya. They are just normal human beings. And if the Quran says about Isa alayhi salam, dispelling what the Nasara say about him being, that he is the Lord. If Allah Azza wa Jal says about him and his mother, كَانَ يَأْكُلَانِ الطَّعَامِ, that they used to eat food, meaning that they have an internal ingestive system, meaning that you will have to eat the food and the food will have to go somewhere. Allah Azza wa Jal is explaining this in the Quran. If that could be said of Isa alayhi salam, imagine what we could say about MI5. Imagine what we can say about, we can say a lot more about Bani Bashar, about human beings. So don't be afraid, and we teach people, do not be afraid. We teach people to say, if any of the security services do something to harm you, break the law, whilst they may say, we're watching, we say, Uqsim billahi al-azim, we're watching you right back. That's our attitude. And that's why I say to you, there is no organization like Cage. They have done the worst that they could do to us and continue to do so. But just as our belief as Muslim is we never allow our oppressor, our torturer, our murderer, our abuser to be our teacher, we remind them that Allah Azza wa Jalla says, La tadlimuna wa la tudlamun. Do not oppress and do not be oppressed. So inshallah I'm going to end there. We'll take Q&A inshallah, if that's okay. Wa sallallahu sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Extend our thanks and gratitude to Brother Moazzam for the heart-moving and heart-trembling talk that's opened our eyes to some of the grievances and sufferings of our brothers and sisters throughout the world. And while we're bogged down with just day-to-day life, we sometimes forget about this suffering and it becomes dismissed and marginalized. So it's a stark call for us to try to do something within our capacity to help those who are suffering. So barakallahu feek with that, Brother Moazzam. Are there any questions, brothers and sisters?
In terms of the organisation, Brother mentioned that it's now international. What does that mean then in which countries? Is that sort of legal teams in countries or legal teams from here that are supporting? Just if you give some insight into what that means.
Okay, so the brother's question is in relation to Cage being international. In what way has Cage become international? Have we got legal teams across the different parts of the world? They go from here or elsewhere. So to briefly give an explanation, Cage essentially has always been international because it was born out of the dungeons of Guantanamo, where prisoners were from all over the world. What's different is that it now has people that are working for Cage in different parts of the world. So there was a point in which we had Cage South Africa, and that's no longer operative, but we are closely linked to the people in South Africa. We have Cage offices in Austria, in France, in the UK. We have working relationships with many countries beyond that, in the Netherlands, and so forth, in different parts of the United States. We work very closely with lawyers and legal teams in the United States of America, Afghanistan, obviously, because of the nature of Afghanistan had the largest number of Guantanamo prisoners. So we've got a very strong working relationships, very international in its scope and its reach. And we are attempting to build those relations, and they are building. It's important because there was a time when people would say, don't come near Cage because it's too hot and so forth. But you see, the temperature rose without us. And one thing people recognize is consistency and patience upon your principles. And Cage is always held to its principles, regardless of hard times and so forth. And our support, we are solely supported by our community, not by any organizations, not by any governments and so forth, but solely by our community. And from having around 4 or 5 staff members in about 2003 to 5, we now have close to 25. Alhamdulillah.
Any other questions, brothers?
It's just a quick one about the number of detainees that are still in Guantanamo. Do you know the exact numbers and what's the sort of release rate looking like at the moment?
Yeah.
Countries taking them back, or?
It's a very good question. So the question is that in relation to numbers of those who are still imprisoned in Guantanamo, the answer is that there are 30 imprisoned in Guantanamo, amongst them Abu Zubaydah. There are 3 categories of prisoners there at the moment. There are those who are cleared for release, and that's around 16. And we believe that a significant number of those, inshallah, will get released soon. There are others who have been what's called charged under the military commissions. Now, this is really important because they include somebody called Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who is allegedly the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks. Now think about this. It's been how long since 9/11? 23 years? Yeah? How many people have been convicted for their role in 9/11? No one. No one. For actual role. No one. Even though they've had Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in prison. And they've attempted to use evidence that they extracted from him while they were torturing his children in front of him. And they've still not been able to convict him. So there's a process where they're going to keep him and several others that they accuse of serious crimes in Guantanamo. So I can't see them being released anytime soon. And then there's the ludicrous category that Abu Zubaydah is in. And that is the category of the forever prisoner. The forever prisoner doesn't mean that you've been convicted, therefore you're in there for life imprisonment. It means that they don't want to release you. And in Abu Zubaydah's case, they say he's too innocent to charge and too dangerous to release. What does it mean? Why is he too dangerous to release? It's because not what Abu Zubaydah did. He's never harmed a single American. But it's what was done to Abu Zubaydah. The level at which, see, there have been books written about Abu Zubaydah, films, including one in Hollywood that's been made about Abu Zubaydah, or at least his experience. And they are looking to somehow dispose of him so that his story never comes out. I mean, from his mouth. It can come out from my mouth, but from his mouth. So that's the other category of prisoner. And there are others. There are others who are known as forever prisoners. Abu Zubaydah, by the way, it's ludicrous. It's insane. He has been given special designated persecuted prisoner status because he was tortured in Poland, Romania, and Lithuania by the CIA. His lawyers took those countries to court, and those countries were forced to accept that Abu Zubaydah was persecuted by them, and they paid him, listen to this, they paid him close to $500,000 in compensation while he's still in Guantanamo. So obviously he doesn't have that money. What are you going to do with that money if you can't even get out? But it's the ludicrous nature of the so-called justice system. Yeah, so Abu Zubaydah indeed is the one who's released the pictures in the New York Times in 2018 that are self-portraits of torture, which include the waterboarding and being held in a coffin.
Brother Damien talked about the community supporting Cage in terms of financially. Are there any opportunities non-financial that Ummah can support with?
Okay, so the question by the brother is, are there any non-financial opportunities of supporting Cage? The answer is absolutely. This is one of them. Organizing events, awareness events, but also supporting those who need support. One of the things Cage does that, again, well, this is financial, but also it's one aspect of Cage that we work on always is that anyone that's released from Guantanamo, we make sure we give them a certain amount of money. Usually it's about £5,000 so that they can get up on their feet. And as an example, there's a young man called Yusuf who graduated a couple of years ago from university in Westminster. He's a Russian Tatar from Tataristan. His father was in prison with me in Bagram. And in total, he was in prison for 23 years. He just came home a couple of months ago. When he knocked the door, he told me, when I knocked the door and said to my mother, this is a small village in Tataristan, that it's me, your son. She opened the door, saw him, and she dropped. She fainted. She hadn't seen him for 23 years. Yusuf has never seen his father. Never. And Yusuf lives in London, his father lives in Tataristan. Inshallah, soon he'll be going to visit him for the first time. The reason I'm saying this is because this story in and of itself, if people were to spread it around and to talk about it and say such cases exist and there's a direct link between somebody who lives in the UK, this is not somewhere far off, we want people to spread this story, to talk to people about this. For us, it's a success story. So learning about the cases is crucial. And once you learn about them and you spread them and you disseminate them, that helps our work and it helps the work of the empowerment. Because all of these brothers that I talked to you about, if you were to meet them, all of the prisoners, first of all, you'd never believe they'd been imprisoned. From how they speak, how they talk, how they interact. And you're more likely to find your problem solved by such a brother than him coming to you with a problem. And so in other ways that you can help us, we seek articulate individuals, brothers mostly, but sisters as well, who can write, who can speak, who have crucially, extremely crucially, firmly grounded in Islam. It's extremely important because you can get pulled left, right, and center if you're not firmly grounded in Islam. So we don't say, learn the Quran and learn the Sunnah, become experts in it, and just go and sit there. No. That's your bare minimum. And it doesn't mean you have to be an Islamic scholar to join Cage, but you should have good groundings. And we are in need of people who are confident. And one thing Cage tries to do is to produce and to replicate, where we can, confident Muslim individuals who are able to articulate our position. So volunteer for the organization, write for us, set up events for us. We speak every single year at universities across the country because we know it may be a repetitive message, but you've got to tell it to each new generation. Yeah, Cage.NGO. Cage.NGO.
Any other questions with us?
Sheikh, I might digress a bit. Just in the last few days we've seen what's happening in Syria. There's a lot of conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Just maybe some questions on that situation.
Sure.
How we should react.
Yeah, so the brother's question is about Syria. We've seen a lot of things happening recently in the past few days on Syria. Can we talk about that? First of all, your question is really relevant. It doesn't digress at all. I know about Syria well, and it's because in 2012 and 13 I was there with my wife. She was treating the wounded. My role was to seek individuals who'd been handed over, and I'll say this, I'm going to say this slowly so you take it in. I was working on the cases of individuals that had been captured by the Americans in the war on terror and were sent to Bashar al-Assad to be tortured. So as part of the CIA's outsourcing of the torture program, let me quote a man, his name is Robert Baer, he is a former CIA intelligence officer. He said that if you want someone interrogated, you send them to Jordan. If you want, meaning us, CIA, if we want somebody tortured, we send them to Syria. And if we want somebody to disappear, we send them to Egypt. When I was in Bagram, one of the things the Americans threatened me with, they said, if you do not cooperate, we'll do to you what we did to Ibn Sheikh al-Libi. It was a Libyan man that they tortured, and they sent him to Egypt to be tortured. We'll send you to Egypt or to Syria. Now, this is really, really important, that Syria is this great country that is part of the axis of resistance. And whilst we recognize and understand that the resistance in Palestine are forced to take support from wherever they can get it, Bashar al-Assad and his father were involved in torturing Muslims. The city of Hama has just fallen, right? It's just fallen, which is unbelievable because Hama in 1982 saw one of the biggest massacres in the Arab world. 25,000 men, women, and children slaughtered because they were accused of being part of the Muslim Brotherhood by Hafiz al-Assad, the father of Bashar. It is unbelievable. I met in Syria when I was there a man called Abu Ahmad. He told me that he was in prison in a place called Tadmur, where everybody was being, there were that many prisoners. Imagine a room like this. There's so many prisoners, nobody knows who's who. Each person's given a number. He said because he was a teacher of the Quran and their love for him as a teacher of the Quran, when his number came up, you know when they called your number, you're going to get hanged or shot. His number was called, he was asleep. Somebody went in his place. And I know that Abu Ahmed told me this, he died recently, may Allah have mercy on him. And so this was the backdrop. So that was 25,000 after the revolution that took place that was peaceful in the beginning in places like Daraa and others. The Assad regime brutally repressed the Muslims there, and torture and rape was widespread. As I said to you before, we as Cage were doing scores of cases of people who'd been disappeared and handed over by the Americans to Assad regime to be tortured. So yes, they may have some dislike for Israel and so forth, of course we understand that, but they have a greater dislike for Muslims who want to be, who uphold their deen. And that's why you can see in Gaza, around 45,000 people have been killed. May Allah grant them the highest rank of Jannat al-Firdaus al-A'la. But do you know how many were killed by Bashar al-Assad in Syria? 610,000. That is from 2012 until now. We are up in arms, rightly so, about what's happening in Gaza, but we have absolutely no knowledge or no reciprocal response to what was done by Bashar. So it is really important that we understand this, that the context of this is nothing to do with they attacked Hama and Aleppo because the Israelis gave them the green light and it's all a conspiracy. This is totally to take away from the experience of the Syrians who themselves suffered a genocide, far greater in numbers. So it's really important that we get that, inshallah.
Was there any prisoners that got transferred from Guantanamo Bay to another prison and died?
They died.
Yeah.
So the question by the brother is that are there any prisoners from Guantanamo who were transferred to another country and they died? The answer is yes. Yes, there are, unfortunately. There are several. There were 4 brothers that were sent to Kazakhstan, of all places. Out of those, 2 have died. One of them died in Kazakhstan. One of them, his name is Lutfi bin Ali. He's from Tunisia. He suffered heart problems and required treatment. He managed to get to Mauritania and he wanted to go to any country just to get treated. They didn't have the treatment in Mauritania and eventually he died also. There are others. Sheikh Ala, who was Egyptian, he was sent to Albania. He also died recently. But Albania essentially became his home. There's the horrible case of Salim al-Ghraib, who was sent from Guantanamo. He's a Libyan. He was sent from Guantanamo to Senegal. And in Senegal, him and another brother, Omar Khalifa, they'd started to rebuild their life there again, and then they were forcibly taken to Libya, put into prison after 15 years of imprisonment already. No crime, no charge. But just because you're a Guantanamo prisoner, people don't know what to do with you and want to get rid of you. So they took him, put him into a prison cell in one of the Libyan militias, and eventually, after a while, Salim, after being released from prison, died. So there are many cases. Unfortunately, brothers are starting to die. Just a few weeks ago, Abdurrahim Rabbani, who is a Pakistani, originally from Burma. The family's from Burma originally. They are the nephews of Sheikh Muhammad Ayub, who was one of the imams of Masjid al-Nabawi. He returned home from Guantanamo after 21 years. He died about 3-4 weeks ago.
Was the one that died in prison in Libya, I think?
So the story you're asking about was Ibn Sheikh al-Libi. Ibn Sheikh al-Libi is the one who was taken, again believed to be a senior member of Al-Qaeda. He was not. He was tortured in Egypt by the CIA, and he gave a famous, infamous rather, statement to the CIA that Saddam Hussein was working with Al-Qaeda on obtaining weapons of mass destruction. That became the false justification for the invasion of Iraq. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and there were no weapons of mass destruction. All came after. Al-Qaeda came into Iraq after the invasion. And Ibn Sheikh al-Libi turned up dead in his cell in 2009 in Abu Salim prison. And they claimed that he committed suicide. I went to that prison in 2012 during the revolution. There is no way you can hang yourself. And I asked the other prisoners, they said they just left him. He'd caught tuberculosis and they left him to die. They didn't treat him. And they didn't want him. He's one of those other people, just like Abu Zubaydah. Yeah, in fact, he was close to Abu Zubaydah. He's one of those people that they did not want him and his story getting out, because the invasion of Iraq was based upon a tortured testimony they took from him. They did, yes, yes.
The fact that they make out that these states are like, rogue states, they have their own
Yeah.
demons.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, for anybody who's listening elsewhere, it's really important that we have, it's so important to have this kind of background understanding. Everything is in black and white. It's not just anti-imperialist versus imperialists. At times they have common goals, and at times they have common enemies, and at times they may be friendly to us and friendly to others. But Muslims, when they carve out their own direction, independent of left and right, you'll often find that there is intelligence cooperation between enemies against Muslims who are assertive of their identity.
This is one of the reasons that brothers get confused. You go to like pro-Palestinian demonstrations, or like these socialist activists, we're standing side by side when it comes to Palestine, but when it comes to Syria, even on the book, they say something else.
Yeah, so the brother makes a very good point, is that this is very confusing, and you'll see it with Palestine activism. We stand on one side, in a sense, but they won't stand on issues regarding Syria. And that's why it's crucial for us to talk about them. It's a hard one to manage, but we have to be able to compartmentalize these things. Sometimes our alliances with people on the left have, we should be thankful for them, but at the same time, not at the expense of the harm against others, and it's been a massive harm. So we should stand by that. And I remember, alhamdulillah, by one of the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that I remember when I was in Syria, the Syrians used to say, what is it with you British guys? You've got ambulances coming over, you've got fire trucks, dump trucks, food, aid, medicine. I have two friends. One of the friends is a doctor. He was killed in Syria. Dr. Isa Abdurrahman, may Allah have mercy on him. He gave his life treating the people in Syria. He was killed. So the Syrians found it hard to understand, why are all these British guys coming over? And they felt the love. Now, of course, ISIS came along and stabbed the back of the brothers in that, and so forth. And the direction changed. But if you recall that period from 2011-12 until at least 4 or 5 years afterwards, there was a massive buzz amongst Muslims to try to support the Syrians. Because they understood, most ordinary people understood that what was going on in Syria was quite different to the other places, because here there's an actual revolution taking place. They want to change the entire system. And that's why you'll find that actually Russia, France, Britain, America, they all opposed the revolution. They may say that they supported it to some extent, but actually they opposed it. And you can see that through the bombing campaigns where Britain and America and Russia would coordinate their bombing of the rebels.
It's just a question regarding Dr. Aafia. So you mentioned that potentially getting a pardon for her before Biden leaves office, which is quite soon. So first question, what's the sort of likelihood that we'll see Dr. Aafia being pardoned and potentially freed? And a follow-up question to that, isn't it in their potentially in their best interest to make Dr. Aafia like that sort of forever prisoner? What's the likelihood of her getting released? What's the likelihood of her potentially becoming that forever prisoner?
Okay, so understanding the case of Dr. Aafia Siddiqui requires a little bit of background knowledge, and so let me just say this. Aafia Siddiqui cannot be like a forever prisoner because she's convicted of a crime. She's gone through a legal system, right? And the real aspect about Aafia Siddiqui is that we're trying to seek the pardon before Biden goes, because it's the quicker process. And there is precedent for presidents to release people before they leave as an act of faith. So normally that's people who have committed crimes in which there are no victims. In Aafia's crime, the only victim is Aafia. Nobody was harmed. She was given an 86-year sentence. And if I can quickly just go over why was this. Aafia Siddiqui, imagine she's in a prison in Bagram for 5 years. She's tortured and abused and so forth, but the Americans claim she's not in custody. So the Americans deny. Why do they deny this? Because by the time she's been a couple of years in custody, there's a massive movement on the streets of Pakistan calling for her. So now it's become a cause célèbre for the whole Muslim world. Everybody's talking about it. She eventually comes out as soon as Yvonne Ridley talks about the case, after I tell her that I used to hear a woman screaming in Bagram. She then makes a big noise. She goes to Bagram, talks to the leaders there, talks to Imran Khan, and it starts becoming a massive story. As if by magic, Aafia Siddiqui turns up at the chief central police station in Ghazni with her son, accused of attempting to shoot an American soldier. Now just think about this. This is what happened. Aafia goes and she's told that if you come to this masjid in Ghazni, you will get your daughter back. Her son's already returned to her. Now imagine you've been reunited with your son after 6 years. You can bet you don't even know who he is. He doesn't know who you are, especially at the age of 6. So they're together. She comes to this masjid, Khalid ibn Walid Masjid in Ghazni. And I've got this from eyewitnesses. She's standing out there and is told that your daughter will come, you just wait here. Ghazni is a deeply conservative place. You don't see women sitting around outside the masjid. So people notice, they try to come to talk to her. This brother who's a tailor, he told me this himself. I went there, tried to talk to her, spoke to her in Urdu. He speaks Urdu. Behan, aap meri pupi ke yahan chali jaye. Come to my pupi's house, my aunt's house, and there stay the night. Tomorrow you can resume what you need to do. She said, no, main kisi ki intezar kar rahi hu. I'm waiting for someone. While he's talking to her, several Afghan National Police vehicles turn up, and the police officers get out and they form a semicircle around her, point guns to her, and they say Pakistani khudkoshi bombar, which means in Farsi that it's a Pakistani suicide bomber. The brother who's telling me the story, he said, I tried to intervene in between and they smashed me down to the ground with rifle butts. And they rip off her hijab, and he gets up and tries to fight back. To him, his honor, how could you do this? Ripping off her hijab. There is no suicide vest. There is no bomb. There's nothing. It's her and a little child, and he's crying. And then they take her off, kicking, screaming, pulling her into the police station. What happens next is the reason why Aafia is in prison. What happens next, she's not accused of terrorism. Aafia is not a convicted terrorist. Aafia was not charged with terrorism. What happens next is that she's in the police station, in Ghazni Central Police Station. And I've been there many times now. And the Americans say, this is the American version of the story, then I'll tell you her version. The American version of the story is this, is that when they come in, the Americans walk in, they heard Aafia is here now. And she's sitting in a room behind a curtain. They say that she pulled the curtain. There happened to be a gun leaning across, along the wall, one of the guns of the Americans, an M4 rifle. She tries to grab that and shoots. She misses. So they one of them takes out the gun, his sidearm, and returns fire. And he shoots Aafia, hits her twice in the stomach. After that, she's taken to the United States. That's American's version. Aafia's version is this, that she's here behind the curtain, waiting for something to happen, she's not sure what's going to happen. And she hears American voices. She's traumatized by American voices for the past 5 years. So she peeks through to see what's happening. Who are they? They see her. They think, hold on, she's supposed to be a suicide bomber. She's on the loose. So they take out a sidearm or a rifle and shoot her. The question that was never asked at court is that why would an American soldier, that it's never happened in the history of US prison guarding prisoners in Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo or anywhere else, that a soldier left his weapon unattended and a prisoner got it, out of hundreds and thousands of prisoners. More importantly, how can she just pick up a gun and shoot it? A gun requires, first you have to check if there's any bullets in the magazine. Then you have to cock the gun. But it's an M4 rifle, and Afghanistan is full of Russian rifles, which have a totally different cocking system. How would you know how to cock a bullet and put one in the round, in the chamber? Then where would you know is the safety? The safety system of an AK-47 is totally different to that of an M4. How would she know all of that within a split second? Nobody bothered to ask that question. It was simply 9/11's happened. This is Lady Al-Qaeda. Whose word are you going to take? Hers or our soldiers? And that's why she was convicted. To get all of that and a lot more into court, we've got now a 56,000 word document to present to court. It's going to take a long time. And we think it's much easier to try to do this. It's a long shot. It's probably that we will have to litigate all of this, which means many more years for Aafia in prison.
Just linking in with that, Brother Moazzam, was there something to do with the Americans said that the two shots she fired, there was 2 bullet holes in the roof, but they did a press conference earlier on in that day, and they played back the tape, and then bullet holes were already there from previous.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. Yeah. So there's a lot more, and one example, there were some allegations against Aafia even before this, right? And listen to this allegation. The allegation against Aafia, because one of the things they asked her to do is that, can you empty your handbag? So she's asked to empty a handbag, and out of that drops a piece of paper and some money. Now, we spoke to the custody sergeant because it was alleged that she had poison and that she was going to poison the well and the water system of Ghazni, of all places. So if anybody doesn't know Ghazni produced the most mujahideen in that region to fight against the Americans than any other place, other than Helmand, right? So Aafia Siddiqui is going to go and poison the mujahideen who are fighting the Americans, though she's supposed to be Lady Al-Qaeda. There's the other one. This is right out of the 4 lions. This one's out of the 4 lions. And that is this, that Aafia Siddiqui is planning to bomb a mosque. And that mosque is called Al-Jihad Mosque, because in it pray former mujahideen and current mujahideen. And Aafia Siddiqui is planning to bomb that mosque. So, I don't know who wrote the script for that, probably Brother Barry. But that was thrown out. But there is, alhamdulillah, we've managed to get statements of support from the former governor of Ghazni, who worked with the Americans, from police officers who were in the police station at that time. We've got it all, but as I said, reopening that case is going to take a while.
What's the likelihood she'll get pardoned?
Well, what we have this time around that we've never had before is the Pakistani Prime Minister, what's his name again? Shehbaz Sharif. He's actually written a letter. I've seen the letter, I think it's public now, calling for Aafia to be released as part of a pardon, supporting the petition and supporting the clemency. So now there's a will. Before in the line of the Pakistanis, there was no will. And perhaps the ISI, like before in the past, may intervene. But there now is a letter from a head of a nation to a head of a nation. And I believe in the next coming days, a delegation is supposed to go from Pakistan, which will include Fawzia and others, that will officially call for Aafia's return. And this can happen. I believe it can happen, inshallah. And if it does happen, then Pakistan, and if she goes to Pakistan, then they'll have to manage how they deal with the debris that comes from what did Pakistan do to this woman. And that's why it's been suggested she may go to a third country for rehabilitation before she goes to Pakistan.
Any other questions with us? Oh, you had your hand up.
No, it's part of the
Isn't there like a CIA asset in Pakistan, that doctor? Can't they trade that?
Yeah, so I believe that there was an attempt to seek an exchange between Dr. Afridi, who's accused of essentially selling out bin Laden and so forth, that the Americans they want to protect him, and that could happen. I don't know what's become of that. But yeah, I do know Americans have, on several occasions, responded positively to prisoner exchange. They've done that several times with the Taliban. Well, the Taliban have, to my understanding, and I've met with them many times, wanted to get her released, even put her name down. But the hindrance has come from Pakistan. She's not an Afghan citizen. So they can get their citizens released and have done so. But Pakistan has had plenty of opportunity. There was the famous, infamous Raymond Davis CIA officer who shot dead 2 or 3 people in Lahore, and he was taken into custody by the Pakistanis. They had an opportunity then to do a prisoner exchange. But I think there was never a will because Pakistan handed her over to begin with. So yeah.
Any other questions with us?
Salam. Wa alaikum salam.
I just want to say to you firstly that I got a message from Syria a few days ago. One of the brothers was saying that let people know here and ask them to make dua. And maybe there'll be a good news within a few days, inshallah, bismillah. Also, I'd like to say to you, I love you for the sake of Allah.
May Allah love you who love me for a sake.
There was a program on YouTube. An interview was done of a brother, sister called Amina.
Janjua. Amina Janjua. Oh, okay.
Are British schools hostile to Muslim children? Interesting interview. My brother should listen to it. In there it was mentioned that schools teach Muslim children to be inferior. My question is, do you feel that our mosques as schools are also teaching our children to be inferior?
It's a very good question the brothers asked. Are our mosques and schools teaching our kids to be inferior? I think the government would say in relation to the schools that we're teaching people to be equal citizens. That's their argument, right? We have seen through legislation, through the media, through politicians, that actually the vision is, whilst it's important to recognize that Britain is probably one of the best place, I think, in Europe for Muslims currently. We are dealt with through legislation, through a 2-tier system. That's just evident. The duty for our masajid, I'll give you an example, is like I said, that why wouldn't a masjid teach the children about Srebrenica when Jewish teachers are teaching Jewish children about the Holocaust? What's the reason? What is the reason? Is it because you don't know? You don't care? You don't want to? What's the reason? You don't want to upset? You don't want to rock the boat? The boat, you don't get worse rocking of the boat than genocide. So my view, brother, in answer to your question, is that our masajid have failed deeply, terribly, even from the Quran and the Sunnah. Imagine we taught our children that the Quran, why was the Quran put into a book in the first place? Just that lesson in itself. Why was the Quran put into a book? What's the reason behind it? Why don't we know? Why isn't that? I bet you no masjid teaches that. And so you have to ask yourself, why not? It doesn't mean that people are going to go running around and start killing people on the streets and murder. It doesn't mean that, but at least you should be proud of the tradition of sacrifice. You should be proud of that. In modern times, why are the names Abdul Karim al-Khattabi? Put your hand up if you know the name Abdul Karim al-Khattabi. You don't know? Why don't we know? He is a Moroccan scholar who in 1925 defeated the largest army of occupiers and colonizers in history. In 1925, 100 years ago, of Spanish, defeated an entire Spanish force of 20,000 soldiers. The Spanish government broke as a result. Franco Nero, who went on to become the leader of the Spanish fascists, was present, and he was traumatized by what these Muslims did. They were guerrilla fighters, and their tactics were so powerful that they were studied by Che Guevara and by Ho Chi Minh and by Mao Zedong. Why do we not know his name? Why do we not teach our children about Omar al-Mukhtar? We talk about anti-fascism. The anti-fascists fighting on Cable Street and fighting here and fighting there. Nah, you don't get better anti-fascist fighters than Omar al-Mukhtar. Omar al-Mukhtar is the first person to, in battle, fight the fascist government of the Italians. And what happens to him? Why don't we teach our youth that when they hang him, and what does he say? Look at his izzah and his honor. Prisoners are caught by the Italians, and the brothers who are with him, they say, Ya Umar, we want to torture their guys because they tortured us. What does he say? Famously, they are not our teachers. Look at that. Why can't we teach that? Why can't we teach that when he goes and he is taken to the scaffold, what does he say? What are his last words? Ya ayyatun nafs al-mutma'inna irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. That his last words before he's hanged. Why can't we teach that? Why can't we teach Imam Shamil? Why can't we teach about the resistance of Tipu Sultan? Why can't we teach about Amir Abdul Qadir and so many others? Why are they not taught in our masajid and marakis? Why not? In the Jewish school I went to, they taught about, you know about Maccabee, the famous, the Maccabee thing that happened just now. The Maccabee fans. Where's the name Maccabee come from? Judah Maccabee, or in Latin, Judas Maccabeus. He leads a rebellion against the Persians, against the Babylonians. He refuses to bow down to them. He fights them. It's like a rebel group of about 300 or 400 people. He fights. And he's the one. For him, they write, the menorah, the light, the candled light. It's for him in remembrance of his rebellion. It's taught right across. And that's a symbol of Judaism to this day. So yes, your answer is, it's absolutely, the masajid have failed. Because we get pulled in one side or the other. And we have a very rich history, a very rich contribution to history, civilization, that even that we don't know. Even that we don't know. Everybody talks about, I'll just give you one little thing here. Arsenal, right? Arsenal. The name Arsenal, everybody loves Arsenal, right? But you know where the word comes from? Where does the word Arsenal come from? Dar as-sina' al-asliha. That's actually Arabic, from the place of manufacture of the weapons. An arsenal is a place where weapons are held. It means, and there are hundreds of words that come into the English language directly from the Arabic. If we were to teach that in our schools, if we were to teach that in our masajid, and link that up, I'll give you hundreds of words that you use on a daily basis that are directly related to Arabic. So yes, brother, the answer is yes, we have totally failed. We have produced, mashallah, huffaz of the Quran, lots of them. Right? But tell me, how has that protected our deen? In and of itself, by itself. It's not enough.
On that point, how do we change, even at the local or national, what is it that needs to happen? Not as individuals, but also as a community.
How do we change this? This is going to require generational change. If you go to South Africa, for example, right, there are people there that are ethnically Indian or Malaysian or Indonesian, ethnically. To look at them, they look like that. Barely in the anti-apartheid struggle, they have institutions of ulama learning their deen, and they're very strong on issues connected to the ummah. Yet they are geographically very far away from the ummah. And over a period of 100 or so, 150 years, they've carved for themselves a very unique Islamic identity. Strong, confident, capable, able, and perhaps their circumstances are different to ours. But one of the reasons why this community, inshallah, in the future will be strong is because we're forced to. We're forced to. Just like the Ahl Sufa went up to fight to defend the Quran, we are being forced to, compared to many other Muslims around different parts of the world, especially in the Muslim world, we're forced to justify who we are here all the time. From our dietary regulations, from our dress codes, from our masajid, from our unique But one thing I would say to you, one of the reasons why did Allah say you are the best of nations? What's the reason? كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس. You are the best of nations. Why? تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. So your enjoining good or forbidding evil comes before what? وتؤمنون بالله. So it's a prerequisite. It's a prerequisite for you to be amongst the best of nations, for us to enjoy good and forbid evil. And we've got to start within our own communities. And unfortunately, sorry, just to say, I don't know how it is here in Rochdale. Well, I do from the news.
Don't believe everything you read.
Yeah, I mean, somebody told me don't make any of those kind of, combing jokes in Rochdale. But, that's one example, right? Our prisons are filled with Muslims. Filled. And the majority of them are not in there for political reasons. They're in there for, other reasons. And I say this, I come from Birmingham. And we have, let alone the groomers, right? But we have the worst criminals in the country. Drug gangs, thieves, sexual offenses, you name it, the Muslims are involved in it. So we have produced, so look at that, look at this. We have more masajid than we've ever had before, more programs of hifz, learning Arabic, Quran, memorization of ahadith, traveling to the Muslim world. We have so much more of it, yet we have more prisoners doing more evil than ever before. How is that possible? It's a major failure of our interpretation of it. And you know what happens in prison, by the way, including with the groomers and they all start practicing. They all start practicing. That's your way out. Killed somebody, go start practicing. Raped somebody, go start practicing. Abused a child, go start practicing. And you know what this does? It gives a way out. Easy way out. Without any process of tasfiyah. Without any cleansing process. You now are equal to this guy. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, أَفَتَجْعَلَ الْمُجْرِمِينَ كَالْمُسْلِمِينَ مَا لَكُمْ كَيْفَ تَحْكُمُونَ. Do you make the criminals equal to the believers? How is it that you judge? So we have to. When you see crimes carried out by our sons and by our cousins and God knows who else, you've got to be the first one to speak out against them and to hold them by the neck. And what's happening, we see this happen so often, is that the first one comes to the defense of our own criminals is us. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Unsur akhuka zaliman wa madluma." Help your brother whether he's an oppressor or he's an oppressed. Even the Sahaba couldn't understand this. He says, "Ya Rasulullah, we get it, that helping an oppressor, but how do we help an oppressor?" He said, "By stopping his hand." We don't, and that's one of the reasons why we are failing. Remember, the best of mankind, enjoin good, forbid evil. We're not enjoining the good. We're not forbidding the evil. And that's why it's spread like a virus amongst us. May Allah Azza wa Jal protect us all, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khairan. We'll stop the Q&A here, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to emulate what we've learned. There's no benefit in attending, in listening, if we're not going to act upon what's been said. And we don't become more proactive given what Brother Moazzam has shared with us. We ask Allah to enable us to act upon what we learn, to forgive us our shortcomings, and to purify our intentions. Just a few announcements before we finish off, inshallah. Number one is there'll be a new program starting in the masjid from the 8th of December, titled The Journey of the Soul, where we discuss all the stages the soul passes through from death onwards. This will be beginning on the 8th of December after the Isha prayers every Sunday. And we also have another program commencing on the 10th of December, which is titled In the Footsteps of the Beloved. We will be exploring the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the Meccan period. We'll be looking at some historical battles, incidents, events that took place, from which we can draw lessons and incorporate into our day-to-day lives. Jazakumullahu khairan.
Brothers and sisters, inshallah, I know I won't take long at all. I'll keep it really simple and short. I've already talked about Cage and its history. By the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they've been doing a fantastic work, amazing work, and that's all by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and tawfiq min Allah jalla fi ula. Alhamdulillah. So we want your support. In simple words, inshallah, whoever can support Cage to continue their work. We've got so many cases, like Sheikh Moazzam said, we've got so many cases, our cases have increased, and we want to help every single one of them, bi-idhnillah. So we want you to continue your support, inshallah. Any case can cost anything between 100 to 500 pounds, and in some cases even more than that. So whatever you can, donate, inshallah. We will fundraise, inshallah, at the entrance of the masjid, either card or cash. Whatever you can, donate as much as you can. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make your donation a mercy upon you the day of akhirah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make your donation a reason for Allah to shade you where there is no shade except His shade on the day of resurrection. Wallah, the sun is going to be scorching, is going to be extremely close to the people on the day of judgment, and there comes the shade of your sadaqah. Wallah al-Ali al-Azim. And this is not normal sadaqah. It is a sadaqah to help and stand by the oppressed, your brothers and sisters who have been oppressed. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to free all our necks from the hellfire. Allahumma ameen. Jazakum Allah khairan. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant you all the best of this life and the hereafter. Allahumma ameen.
And also just from me, I'd like to say Jazakallah khair to Rochdale Community Masjid for inviting me to speak here. May Allah bless the brothers here involved in this initiative. One of the things we found with, I did say some of the masajid have failed, but there are a significant number of masajid who are trying to make a difference and make a change in the way they think and approach, and I believe this is one of them. So may Allah Azza wa Jalla accept it from you, inshallah.